Welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday, a lectionary podcast from the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'm John Kennedy.
I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
Today we are continuing through Matthew's Gospel, and we have two stories. And in one of them, we find out that Jesus doesn't really like to wash his hands. So let's find out what that's about. This is chapter 15, verses 10 through 28. Then Jesus called the crowd to him and said to them, "Listen and understand. It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but it is what comes out of the mouth that defiles." Then the disciples approached and said to him, "Do you know that the Pharisees took offense when they heard what you said?" He answered, "Every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind guides of the blind. And if one blind person guides another, both will fall into a pit." But Peter said to him, "Explain this parable to us." Then he said, "Are you also still without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth enters the stomach and goes out into the sewer? But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this is what defiles. For out of the heart come evil intentions, murder, adultery, fornication, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile." Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Just then, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. So I mentioned the hand-washing one, but this is the one that I think really calls our attention and gets our emotions activated. I mean, this is a tough passage, a tough story.
It's very tough. Yeah, tough, especially if taken at face value.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So,
I mean, the hand washing, I guess, does that come before this passage?
It does.
It's talking about he didn't wash his hands, so they call him out on it. And here's and this is what he says.
That's
in
right.
response.
For some reason, it's not included in the lectionary, at least this cycle.
Yeah, our lectionary leaves us with a lot of hanging chads.
Yes.
And in this passage, the lectionary gives us the choice whether to drop that whole beginning and just
do the Canaanite
go
woman.
with the Canaanite story. But I'm glad that we have the choice because I think these two really go together. And I feel that it's sort of like two chapters of a movie or something like that because it's a contrast. And if we follow last week where we were talking about Jesus possibly reenacting the movements of Joshua into the promised land, and sending his disciples alone on the boat ahead, and he comes to be with them, but he's got this sense that he urgently wants them to cross over and be there, enter the promised land, or so to speak, at least. And then here we, as we said, it follows, they enter this territory, and so there they are kind of eating with unwashed hands, and Jesus, he's responding to his own people here. The Pharisees are scandalized by him. And, this commentator that I've been reading about the Joshua parallel is saying that the people should be living freely in this promised land, but they're not. You know, they have land and everything, but they're not free. You know, they're living with this morality, purity, police all the time, and everything they do is being watched and measured. You know, moreover, they're, you know, oppressed by Romans and stuff, but still there's not a lot of flowing milk and honey, you know what I mean?
No, not really.
But anyway, so Jesus is like, you have it all wrong. And, you know, he's using the same list that comes from the 10 Commandments, you know, out of the heart come evil intentions, murder, adultery, fornication, theft, false witness, slander. I mean, these are the 10 Commandments, basically. He's like, these come out of your heart. They don't come in through your dirty hands, you know?
Right.
And they're completely scandalized. And the disciples are scandalized. They're like, don't you know that they're offended by you? I mean, it's like they sense the danger. But then that passage ends, you know, to eat with unwashed hands does not defile, period. And then Jesus leaves this place and goes away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. So these are the, you know, border people or whatever, and the so-called Canaanites. But I read that the term Canaanite here is completely anachronistic. It'd be like us calling a Norwegian a Viking. You know, it's like used here because it's got this possible echoing of the Joshua conquest of Canaan, you know, and here comes Jesus to conquer these lands, but in a whole different way. Yeah. You know, and if you go back to Deuteronomy and everything, Joshua lets some tribes remain. So there's a lot of these displaced people, and we meet the Samaritans and so on. But the people of Tyre and Sidon are these descendants of Canaanite people, right? So here's this woman living in this pocket of land in Canaan, I guess, and she's completely not scandalized by Jesus. You know, I mean, the Pharisees are like so put off, and the disciples. So anyway, that's a little high view, or you know, context, I think, for what's happening in this movement. I have much more to say about that second part, but maybe you want to jump in.
Sure. I think that's such a good setup, especially when it comes to making this story of Jesus and the Canaanite woman, or the Syrophoenician woman, as she's called in Mark, which is maybe more period accurate.
Much more
making that story legible in a way that makes Jesus not seem like a jerk. That you see a juxtaposition and an inversion going on, that Jesus' own people do not receive him, and somebody who is not of his people does. You know, and in broad strokes, that is absolutely what's going on in this passage. And of course, we'll get more into the details, but I certainly don't think we should skip over the first episode about the unwashed hands and the Pharisees for the sake of getting to what might be the more burning questions about how to understand this passage. So of course, the unwashed hands thing is not a cleanliness thing, it's a ritual purity thing. They didn't really know about germs, or how they didn't think about things in the same way, although there may be certain obvious things about what a dirty hand was like. But nonetheless, this was about coming into contact with something that's ritually impure. All sorts of things were ritually impure, according to both the Hebrew scriptures, the Torah, as well as the oral Torah or Pharisaic tradition, which Jesus calls out in the verses that precede this. Basically, Jesus is accusing the Pharisees of being hypocrites because they're upset that he and his disciples don't wash their hands before they eat, because it's on the grounds that it's violating Torah in some way, and Jesus says, well, you have this rule that if you say I'm going to give whatever support to my parents to God, then you're no longer obligated to your parents, which is violating the commandment to honor your father and mother. The former there, the idea that you can get out of any financial obligation to your parents to be dedicated to God, is not biblical. It's sort of an oral or extra biblical tradition, and the honor your father and your mother absolutely is biblical. It's one of the 10 Commandments. So Jesus is saying, you're hypocrites, so you can't, throw such a charge at me and whatever. And we hear this and we think, okay, whatever, Jesus and the Pharisees don't like each other. What else is new? But, we're following along in Matthew's narrative now, and this is, I believe, one of the early instances of a clash between these two, right? And you see evidence of this, I believe, when the disciples say, "Do you know that the Pharisees took offense at what you said?" Right. Like, the Pharisees were popular. They were thought very highly of. They had a high standing among at least some significant portion of the Jewish people of that day. So it would be maybe a little bit like, you or I getting on the wrong side of somebody very high up in the Episcopal hierarchy.
Right.
Not to name any names, because that would be totally distracting, and it's just an arbitrary example, so I'll leave it there.
Right.
But, that's maybe, it's a good understanding. It's not like people of that day were like, "Oh, Pharisees, boo."
Right.
They're like, "Oh, Pharisees, they're somebodies,"
The honorable.
Yeah,
leaders.
the honorable Pharisees. And Jesus doesn't care. He says, "Let them alone. They are blind guides to the blind." I mean, it's just astonishing, his disregard for the esteem of the Pharisees and whatever other consequences might come from that.
Yeah. I mean, he's such a renegade.
Yeah.
And a lot of this conversation, it's like staged for the reader, but in the text, it's like only between he and his disciples, those aside comments, I think, right? And they come to him and say quietly,
Yeah.
And so he's saying that very strong thing just to them. And then by the same token, a lot of what's said in the second paragraph about with the woman in the woman's story, is just between he and his disciples. Like, she doesn't come close till after he says, after they say, "Send her away." She keeps shouting after us. And Jesus says, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Like, she doesn't hear that necessarily. It's not totally clear. But in a way, he's acting out something here for the benefit of his disciples,
right.
Probably in both cases. And he's always teaching them. I mean, they're always along for the learning, right? So he's telling them they are those esteemed established leaders are the blind leading the blind. Let them alone. Just like he said, let the weeds and the wheat grow together. Yeah. I mean, he's still saying let them alone, but he's not going to back down from speaking his truth. And I think throughout Matthew, this breaking in of the kingdom of God, it always brings conflict. It's always stirring the pot. And back in Matthew 11, he talked about, blessed is the one who's not scandalized by me. And there's so many instances of people like really wanting to run him off a cliff.
That's right.
And so when we get to this encounter with the Canaanite woman, it's so striking how, just like the first Joshua, he was sent for the house of Israel, but and here he's saying, "I'm sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And when they say "send her away" because she keeps shouting after us, in the Greek, apparently "send her away" is more like, will you just do something so she'll go away? Oh. Like, will you just respond to her so she'll go away? It's a kind of a mistranslation.
Yeah.
And it makes more sense with that reading when he says, "Well, I was only sent for the house of the lost sheep of Israel." Like, he's not going to answer her. He didn't answer her at all, it says. Yeah. I just noticed that when you were reading, at all. He did not answer her at all.
Very emphatic.
Yeah. So that's sort of interesting that they are seeing her like a fly in their face, and they just want him to do something so she'll back down. But then she comes, and then the other part I've read is that when she's saying, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David," this is the way demons spoke to Jesus too. At one point. Yeah, right. The Garnsey demoniac, or in one of these stories. So a person who's like hysterical like that can either be a demon possessed person or a prophet. So the disciples really don't know what to make of her. Yeah. But they're not liking it either way. And then when she comes to Jesus and she says, "Lord, help me," that's a much more kind of in your right mind plea. And it seems to awaken Jesus. And then he gives this horrible line. "It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." Yeah. And that's the part where I feel like it's for the disciples' benefit.
Oh, I agree.
Because he's not calling her like a rabid dog. He's calling her a house puppy. Yeah. That word. I'm sure you've read that same comment about this Greek. The dogs here is kunarion. It's more like little house puppies
Yes.
or pets.
Yeah.
So back to the point of the tribes that are descended from the ones that Joshua allowed to stay. Israel has Gentiles in their midst, and Jesus is seeing them break in. The disciples are seeing them sort of come in. The puppies are coming into the house,
Yeah.
But so Jesus is treating her a little bit like an insider, but a lesser, like someone whose life is not as valued.
Yeah.
And it's almost like he's acting here in that sense, because he's like, I'm here for the house of Israel, like the first Joshua. And she's so respectful of him. She's already called him son of David. She knows she's in his territory now, And she says, Lord, let yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. And he's so struck by that. Lord, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish. One person called this the conquest of Jesus, and it's got that double meaning of Jesus coming in to conquer Canaan in an opposite way, but he himself lets himself be conquered, and by letting himself be conquered, he conquers the land.
Right.
Because
that's fascinating.
I loved that, the play on the words.
Yeah.
And again, he's kind of, that's his reenactment of Joshua.
Yeah.
To win them over and to move in and like expand. So that was amazing.
That is amazing. Yeah.
None of these are my very own insights. I've borrowed, I've gotten all these from other, wiser people, but I think they're worth sharing.
Definitely. Yeah. I'm with you that I think Jesus is saying what sounds so harsh and sexist and exclusionary for the benefit of his disciples, that he's in Zen master mode here. In that Zen masters often say things that are provocative or shocking to make a point. And they do so at the expense of decorum, of their own appearance of character or virtue. They'll do and say all sorts of astonishing, troubling things.
Right. The rude awakening.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Jesus did this too. I don't think that Jesus really... I don't think this is a straightforward expression of Jesus' own attitude.
No way. Yeah.
And I mean, you see that it really all works out quite beautifully in the end. That, great is your faith, let it be done for you as you wish. And of course, this is the second time that a Gentile, a non-Jew, has come to Jesus in Matthew's gospel and requested a healing for somebody close to them, in this case, Roman centurion or soldier, requesting the healing of a servant boy. And the guard says that, I know if you only say the word. Right. A little liturgical thing here, but we'll save that for the next thought maybe. But if you only say the word, I know that my servant will be healed. Because I know what it's like to, I have people under my authority, and if I say go there, it happens. And he's saying that I recognize that you have spiritual or divine authority, and if you just say the word, that's all I need. I trust that the matter will be settled. And Jesus is like,
that's a great story.
It says Jesus is amazed at his faith, and he says, I have not seen any such faith in all of Israel.
Right.
And this is really another instance of this.
It is.
And the pattern is, of course, Jesus moving out into the world. It's happening geographically. It's happening relationally, and the whole thing is just opening up.
Right.
And it's beautiful, and it's consistent with everything that Jesus is up to in Matthew's gospel, as stated first of all in the Sermon on the Mount, that blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God, and then goes into all these teachings about what the law is really about. And it's like, don't just refrain from killing one another, but like if you have anger in your heart towards a brother and sister, you say something hurtful, like this is what defiles. And it's
right.
It's not about a mere adherence to customs or traditions.
Right.
It's about being transformed from the inside out.
Right. It's not just healthy habits.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Not at all. I mean, it's hard to get it. It's maybe even hard for Matthew to get a handle on Jesus here on some level, because he leaves out something that's in Mark at the end of the first story about washed hands and so on, and the Pharisees. Both have Jesus saying, "These are what defile a person, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile." Mark then says, in parentheses, "Thereby he declared all foods clean."
Right. Oh, wow.
And Matthew leaves that out.
Yeah. He's not ready to go there yet.
Yeah, maybe not ready to go there, because this was a live debate within early Christianity. You see it in the New Testament. Paul's all in on that. He's like, it doesn't matter what you eat.
Right.
And then Peter's
Peter
like, I'm not so sure.
dream.
He waffles. Where he has the dream in Acts, and Acts makes him look more. Paints him getting with that program in a more uncomplicated way, although with a really cool vision to go along with that story. But in Paul's letters in Galatians, he characterizes Peter as really waffling on this, and they have a real confrontation about it.
Yeah.
So it was not settled, perhaps, by the time that Matthew is writing, which is super interesting, that Jesus is just like, even as Matthew's telling the story of Jesus bursting out of any box and defying categories that many people thought were essential to hold on to and to adhere to, even as Matthew's telling that story, maybe Matthew doesn't fully embrace or comprehend it.
Yeah, well, they have enough trouble in the Methian community. You know, they're already trying to cling to their synagogue roots and everything, and they're just being cast out left and right.
Yeah.
And food is the last thing on their mind.
Maybe
to try to change.
Yeah.
Who knows? But that's really interesting. One other just quick context thing I noticed that was super interesting, at least given this idea that Jesus is recasting the tradition of Joshua and ushering in a new way of conquering. So back in chapter 14, when we missed this reading because of the Transfiguration feast day that landed on it, but when Jesus was feeding the crowds on the hillside, it was a Jewish crowd, and at the end of that story, they fill 12 baskets full, and a lot of the numerology talks about, it's the reconstitution of the 12 tribes of Israel, coming together. Jesus is really, bringing everybody into this promised land together. Then after this passage today, later in chapter 15, we have Jesus second time feeding a huge crowd on the hillside, and this time it's full of Gentiles.
Oh,
and at the end, they pick up 7 baskets full. And so in the Joshua story in Deuteronomy, Jesus is hearing God say, conquered these 7, the Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, the 7 tribes bigger and stronger than you are, and, do away with them completely, just wipe them out. And here Jesus, and so in that feeding after this passage, after he's already kind of demonstrated to them how he feels towards this Canaanite woman and he's conquered by her, the reconstituting maybe of the Canaanite people can be seen a little bit in that 7 baskets. So I just thought that was really interesting. And
that is really interesting.
The genius of Matthew with all these allusions. And
very much so. Yeah.
Kind of blows me away. So
really goes along with the theme that we talked about a few episodes back of Jesus both coming out of his own tradition in a very authentic way with real integrity, but also revolutionizing and subverting and inverting certain things about his own tradition. That is, he's mirroring this conquest, but in the first time around with the first Joshua, it's quite murderous and violent. It was a real conquest, and this is a conquest of love,
14
and
centuries
community
later.
building. It's a complete reversal of what the nature of going into these lands looked like.
We can't really overstate the reversal
I know.
that Jesus is working out
so
here.
different.
It's what he's about, I think.
I found something fascinating in Thomas Aquinas, who I've never invoked in this podcast, but he, in his commentary on the story about Jesus and the Canaanite woman, said that there are 5 things about her which were noteworthy and in his view, are perhaps what sort of got her the outcome that she desired, and in any case are exemplary for all of us. He notes her humility, she says, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the table. He notes her patience, that even as Jesus is like kind of being mean to her, she just waits it out. Her prayer, of course, she's saying, have mercy on me, O Lord. She comes in a spirit of prayer. Her perseverance, that she kept asking, despite the opposition and the lack of response she was getting. And of course, her faith, as Jesus says, woman, great is your faith. So I thought that was really nice.
Very. Yeah,
good
that's
sort
great.
of practical application, and
Yeah.
that we can learn from her.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, she becomes an icon.
Indeed.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah. Well, anything else we want to add?
I think that's a great last word.
Okay, I guess that's enough. Well, thank you for tuning in and sticking with us. As always, like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.